So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Cerini Connection, Streamlining Success, How Outsourcing Transforms Operations. I'm Ken Cerini, Managing Partner of Cerini Associates, and I'm excited to be here today with my partner, Al Borghese, who heads up our outsourced accounting department. Today, we're going to explore how outsourcing can help organizations of all sizes, whether you're a nonprofit, a business, a school, optimize your back-end function, reduce inefficiencies, and free up resources to focus on mission and growth, which I know is important to everyone. We'll talk through common challenges we see, practical ways outsourcing can improve operations, and real examples of how organizations have saved money and strengthened their sustainability. Our goal is to leave you with insights that you can put into practices, whether or not outsourcing is on your immediate horizon or not. So again, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. Again, if you have comments or questions and stuff, please throw them in the chat. So let's kind of just jump in. So Al, first of all, thank you for doing this.
Sounds good.
And I guess to begin with, can you talk a little bit about what does outsourcing look like in practice and how does it fit into the broader picture of managing back-end operations?
Sounds good. Well, first off, good morning, everyone. So outsourcing kind of outlines a whole plethora of services that could potentially be provided, and different ways that organizations could implement it into their system. Could be something as simple as looking at their accounting system and possibly implementing new accounting systems and new software, or it could be something as big as taking over their entire back office function of things and acting as a fractional or interim CFO when organizations are having trouble finding a CFO to fulfill a position because of retiree or anything like that.
So when we talk about outsourcing, we're talking about then a spectrum of potential services that either goes to, as you said, taking over the full accounting department and handling all aspects of the accounting department, or taking on certain aspects of that accounting department, whether it be, as you said, a fractional CFO or some other services within.
Yes, absolutely. I think the way to look at it is we find the best way when we kind of walk into a project, or sometimes clients will come to us and not even know exactly what they want. I think the way that you look at it is you have to look at it broken down between the different functions within the back office for finance. Payroll operations, your accounts payable, your receivables management. Sometimes even your top level reporting, that's your monthly board package that's going up to the management team and taking a look at that. That's typically the way that we see it in practice, is breaking down these systems and really taking a look at where there's potentially a void or inefficiencies. I think that's kind of step one in any project, is taking a look at if there are inefficiencies built into a system. Or sometimes we even jump into a project, or someone or a client will, or a potential client will reach out to us and say, I have my AP clerk that's been doing this for 20 years is retiring or is vacating their position at this point. They're the only one that really knows how to do this on our side, and we really don't have anyone cross-trained at it. So then there's a huge void in kind of a system at that point, where we have to come in, assess the situation, take a look at the way that they've been doing things, and kind of fill that temporary or long-term void that's there.
So it then brings up another comment here, because it sounds like then from an outsourcing perspective, it's not just the ability to provide the service that's needed, but also gives an organization a fresh perspective in terms of maybe some of the ways that they can improve their overall operations and functionality.
Absolutely. I think taking a look at a project, from a operational standpoint and looking at it, let's say they have all their personnel, but there's a way that they could do things better. And I think the one thing that's happening now out in the field is you see that, there's the technology aspect of things, AI, kind of all these aspects that are now taking over, where it could make operations more efficient. And I think what's important is that a lot of times organizations are so busy on the day to day and just keeping up with the day to day, they don't have always the time, or the time or bandwidth to actually look into those different sources, different software, different AI kind of functions of things. So that's also kind of where we help our clients, is we help identify technologies, AI. We keep ourselves kind of abreast of what's going on out there, researching, doing internal trainings, and bringing our team up to speed. So that way, all of that administrative burden of trying to do that research internally could be outsourced, where, hey, we know these different things, and technology isn't a one size fits all. There's many different technologies that in there that fit in different situations, and we're really taking the onerous of looking at that and really finding the better fit, so that way you're not kind of spinning your wheels or potentially wasting your time. And I think that's really important in establishing that connection with, your outsourced solution, that if you're looking going that way.
Since we're talking about technology, can you talk about some of the technologies that you're seeing out there that some of your clients are starting to implement that might be beneficial for other people to explore?
Absolutely. So so I just spoke about the example of an AP clerk, but up and leaving their position or something like that, and there being nobody cross-trained on it. So what we're seeing is technology such as Bill.com, or such as there's another solution out there, Certify, or some of these other automated AP kind of solutions of things that give you a dedicated inbox that all of your vendors could send their invoices to. There's AI built into these systems that once you start training the system of how you're coding invoices from particular vendors or particular items, the AI could pick up on that and will learn how you're coding invoices, and now will automatically code the invoices. So the clerk could go in there and kind of take a look at that coding, make sure it's right, and pass it to the next level of approval chain. Sometimes we step into organizations, and a lot of times it's very paper driven still, where there's manual sign-offs on things. And this is where there's electronic sign-offs on the approval chain that are stamped. There's all the back end of security to make sure that the person that is signing into that, based off an IP address or anything like that, that it's the proper person approving the next to get to the next level. In a lot of these systems too, you could even set up where you have multiple approval chains, where the board of directors or someone on the board over a certain threshold could do things. So a lot of these systems could implement a simple approval chain, or you could have a multiple approval chain where it's certain vendors have to be approved by my maintenance team. Certain vendors have to be approved by my accounting team. Certain invoices have to be approved by my programmatic team. So that's kind of one instance of things. Also, we're seeing that Intuit QuickBooks is, starting to implement AI into their technology. And again, AI is a very kind of broad spectrum, right? Everyone hears AI, everyone says what a great tool it is, but I think what's also kind of big is what is it doing? I mean, basically, it's learning kind of the processes and procedures there, and it's trying to automate that kind of those systems of things.
You mentioned that one size does not fit all, and then you started talking about Bill.com and Certify and some of these other AP options. Are these options that integrate with most softwares, or again, is it one of those things where you have to really look at the software, the accounting software that you're using, and determine which is the best fit in terms of what's going to
Well, I think
integrate
that's a
the
great
best?
question, because sometimes what we see is people will jump automatically to the program that so-called syncs with their accounting system. Sometimes what ends up happening is if you don't know how to use the technology properly, it will actually cause more frustration amongst the team. And what I mean by that is sometimes you could see where multiple things will happen, where something will sync over and double book at everything. So I think what's really important, and this kind of goes back with the one size fits all thing, is training your staff and really getting to understand kind of these pieces of things. also where clerks are actually thinking about, where the clerks and the people that are behind reviewing the information really understand what they're doing. This may make it easier for data entry kind of pieces of things, um, but is also kind of reviewing all the information that's going into the system. We could only rely on kind of these tools to help time efficiency, but we still have to be professionals and look at the information that's actually entering into the books. Because if you rely on just the technology alone, that it's doing the correct thing, I think you set yourself up big for failure. So that's one thing that when we're working with a project that we're working on, is making sure that the support and the people that are behind it that are actually going to be utilizing it really understand what's going on too. um, a lot of these softwares do sync in, but I think you also have to make sure that you have your checks and bounds where maybe it's not automatically pushing into the system, but that you're reviewing it first before you push it into the system. Also, there's software such as like FundDZ is a very popular software that nonprofits utilize, or even Blackboard, for example, that do have some connection with certain softwares or everything like that. But I know with FundDZ, I like to use the Excel input import function on there. The reason why is because I could review the data first before pushing it into the system of things. So I think that's kind of really important. Is also not only is it implementing a technology, but it's also what's really important in kind of our world is the process and procedures that go along with that.
Right, right. So a lot of times people think, well, if I outsource, I'm going to save a lot of money by outsourcing. Do you typically find that outsources saves money, or what's the real big benefit of outsourcing?
I think there's a couple of big benefits of outsourcing. I think first, whenever an organization looks at going into outsourcing, they potentially look at it as a way of saving money. But I think if you're looking at it as you're just getting a bookkeeper to do the services, I think you're also kind of setting the relationship up for failure, because the reason why you're outsourcing shouldn't only be just for the bookkeeping aspect of things. That's one part of what that relationship really is. And I think it's actually more, it's less of the importance of what the outsourcing relationship should be. I think it's what else could be brought to the table. So sure, it's the transactional stuff and making sure that's getting in there efficiently, but I think it's also what's being done with that information. How are we looking at that information of things? So are we, once the information's in there, that's great. I think part of it is the time efficiency that goes along with this. But I think the other piece of the outsourced is what does the data mean? And talking to management and kind of that whole relationship and saying, hey, you in these different categories that you're working within in your GL, for example, and doing a month over month, analysis of cost and benefits and kind of all of those type of things, is what else am I bringing to the table? So a lot of times, yeah, we could build in that efficiency and help the clients save money on that relationship. But I think it's also looking and kind of those out of the box thinking of things when we're working on projects of what else could we bring to the table, like different vendors that could look into your expense purchasing, or different vendors to maybe look at your health benefits or anything to help cut costs. And we always look for ways that we could potentially pay for our own fees by helping the client save money in other areas. And I think that's what's really important. I think when you're outsourcing too, what's really important is that it's the time savings that you're getting. So, right, when we work with a project, it's not just you're getting one person, you're getting a team of people. Maybe for maybe for the same cost, maybe a little bit more than what you would be paying your AP clerk, but you're getting a plethora of knowledge from the team that's working with you at various different levels, because you're either staff, a senior accountant, let's say a supervisor, on the engagement, as well as the partner on the engagement. So you're getting a team behind that. And I think another really important piece of the relationship as you go forward is you're not just relying on one person to you're not just relying on one person to stick with your organization for a long time. So if someone happens to leave, you don't feel that, and clients don't feel that because we already have someone, potentially cross trained. So you're not having to look for that next person when the next person's ready to retire. You're not looking for those type of pieces.
Yeah, I think one of the things you said about the fact that it's kind of a team approach, I think that's an important consideration because when you kind of look at things, you know, when you have someone on staff, that staff person has limitations to their knowledge and everything that they have. If you can bring in 3 or 4 people who are fractional in terms of the time they're spending, they can bring to the table a bunch of different skill sets that maybe that one person doesn't have. And, you know, that's again one of the benefits.
Yep. I think
What?
another comment that I like to make is, you also have to look at kind of the pool out there. I think one thing amongst the industry is always there's less and less qualified accountants out there to actually get a task, done. And I think as that kind of pool, shrinks, you like you were saying before, and like I was saying before, is that there's that multiple team aspect of things. So we could save time on instead of it taking a week to do AP, maybe the team's taking 2 or 3 days to do AP, and then we're doing other things to help support the CFO or controller within an organization as well. So you're getting a little bit more add value to the relationship that's there.
When we kind of look at the situation, I mean, there are multiple reasons why somebody might consider or might move to an outsourced environment. What are some of the more common operational challenges or pain points that you've seen the clients that have come to you struggling with that you've been able to provide solutions for?
I think in the industry overall, I think people are looking for time, and they're looking to get their data quickly. They want to get their data quickly in order to make intelligent decisions about how their business is running. And I think that's one of the biggest pain points is with all the changes in funding, with let's say dips in enrollment or something like that. What's really important is making intelligent decisions and making decisions based off of good data. So it's getting that data in there. I think the timelines that might have been okay 5, 10 years ago have ramped up. So I think what's important is getting that information to the boards and the decision makers to really help out.
Someone threw out a question, so I'm going to kind of read it out here.
Yep.
So, what are best practices for a nonprofit to look for outsourcing company? What about a small nonprofit with limited resources to spend to flesh out outsourcing company or for the initial startup fee?
So I think it's all about aligning yourself with the right partner. So if let's start with this small organization. Sometimes we're not the right fit. And I feel like we do a very good job at being upfront with individuals and clients that potentially come to us because they are a Kickstarter. And maybe we're, not the right fit and structure for them. However, we have resources within our network to say, hey, you know what? Let's get you start off to a good start, and let's get you working with so and so that's more of a bookkeeper than anything else to keep up with your transactions. I think it's really important, just like picking anything within your business, is aligning yourself with the right with the right partner, because that's the way that this relationship really needs to be looked at. Is it's not just a vendor relationship, but it really needs to be a partnership. You guys have it, where the outsource is not only just doing the books and numbers, but is also aligning with you to help strategically think of different ways of doing things and really kind of helping out.
I mean, I think one of the things, as you said, is it really comes down to really doing a good self-assessment of your organization and really understanding what you're looking for in that functionality. Is it really just someone who can record the debits and the credits? Is it someone who's going to go beyond the numbers and offer more information? Is it someone who's going to be attending board meetings and doing,
Right.
talking about the fiscal aspects of what's happening at the board?
Right.
So again, I think it really comes down to what are the needs of the organization, and then you can determine whether it fits into your budget or not.
Well, another comment that I'll make about that is um, sometimes it's also using the right mix if you're a smaller organization. So maybe you have someone else do the books, whether you leverage someone internally or a small bookkeeping company that's a little bit more cost effective. And then you utilize a larger practice that will come in on a quarterly basis or a semi-annual basis, look at your books and help you digest a lot of the data and the accounting numbers. Sometimes we're able to actually benchmark peers and say, hey, maybe you could be looking at something a little bit differently because this is the way that your peers are kind of running, where it's not a ongoing kind of relationship, but it's more of a quarterly type relationship that we could work with a smaller nonprofit. And that as you continue to grow, there's options to potentially scale.
So we kind of talked about this maybe a little bit, but maybe we can go a little deeper. So how can outsourcing help streamline processes, improve accuracy, compliance, reporting, all of those things that, again, whether it be a for-profit business or a nonprofit business has to worry about?
So again, I think part of the whole theme here is making sure that you have the right mix of expertise that are within here. I know one thing that we do when we're kind of working with an engagement is we leverage all different aspects of our colleagues within the firm as far as with tax compliance for a nonprofit. Are we doing things right from a tax perspective of things? That's kind of what a for-profit business is, but a little bit more of its goal compared to a nonprofit. I think as far as with making things more efficient, I think it's the expertise and knowledge that you get when you're outsourcing. You could really look at a system and kind of refine a system. So if we're looking at the AP process or potentially the payroll process of things when we come in at a project, it's how is that like we take a look at the process, we assess the process. What part of those pieces of the process could be potentially we leverage technology on? So that's one way of time savings. Where are areas that there potentially is missing compliance? So is our compliance from when we take a look at a payroll system, are we getting all the HR resources that we need from an HR compliance standpoint? Where accountants stepping in, but where are there potentially HR, whether it's a vendor or working even through a PEO type, where you're getting that HR solution built in and you get efficiencies built into there from a compliance standpoint as well. I think from when we step into an AP process, if it's a very manual AP process where it was very paper driven, it's hard to get those paper signatures sometimes because it's a remote world. Sometimes you have your workforce that's working hybrid, so it's hard to get those paper or electronic signatures. So
I think it's also
Yep.
for smaller
Yep.
organizations who maybe are 100% volunteer, and you're relying on a board to approve some of these things. That's another
Right.
place, based on that other question that came up, where, when you're dealing with that smaller nonprofit organization, you want to build controls so that you can, create that scalability, but you can't do that with all the time, as you said, paper.
Well, I think that's a great point too. Is the smaller Kickstarter, let's say, or initial startup organizations, I think a common place that is a little bit of a pitfall is that I want to get the numbers in the books and records right, and maybe I'm not up to the threshold of getting a review or having to have an audit. But potentially a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, I may need that. And it's setting yourself up with the right process procedures up front that become very important, because of the fact that there's organizations that we've worked with where they come to us and they're ready to get a review, but initially they never necessarily thought about their process and procedures and everything else that needed to be there. So I think that's a very important point, that yes, maybe it will be a little bit more costly in the beginning, of working with an organization to get yourself, set up right through an outsourcing company. But I think that speaks volumes once you get to that review or audit level of things, that you're already set up, that you don't have to go back and play catch up to get yourself up to the point where you're audit compliant or review compliant.
So then, you're talking about a lot of different aspects here, and kind of looking for ways that organizations can create better controls, become more compliant, find ways to kind of maybe be more forward thinking. So in your experience, where have you seen the biggest ways that outsourcing has helped leaders focus more on strategy and mission rather than getting caught up in day-to-day operations or get up in crisis management or whatever?
So I think the biggest area is that um, outsourcing them when you're working with that partner, they really take out the back. They really take the day to day minutia and all of that kind of off of those leaders, where they could focus more on knowing that they're working with a trusted outsourced partner that's handling that back office function, and that's getting them good, complete, accurate, timely numbers that they could work with to make important decisions. Um, one thing that we do, I think, a great job at is helping create a robust board package that isn't just about spitting to the board and management a P&L and balance sheet, or it's about also giving them information and data that and trends in those presentations that they could present to, maybe that might spark a question to the board, or spark some other thinking and good thought to sit there and really say, wow, we never thought about that. Let's kind of focus on that area more. And, us alleviating a lot of that back office pressure, I think, is what has helped the leaders of organizations, the CFOs, management, the board, be able to not necessarily have to focus on that day to day, but more of the bigger strategic pieces.
I think a lot of times also you find that when a board and management is not used to getting information, not used to getting timely information, when they do get information, all of a sudden, like, everything opens up and now they're requesting more information and
Right.
additional ways to look at the organization or company
Mm-hmm.
in a different way that'll help them to be more strategic,
Right. Yeah.
which
I,
is important.
Yep, I think
Um,
being able to be
right.
forward thinking and focus on the budgeting aspect of things, and budgeting, being able to budget earlier than what you've ever had to before. I think, we get very early in the budgeting process also with our clients because we have good data from the previous year to work off of. So to be able to plan that far ahead and to be able to, I think one thing that I haven't talked about yet, and I probably should have, is, kind of that forecasting aspect of things. You know, budget to actual as far as on a monthly basis versus on a quarterly basis. Being able to do that type of practice, that's important to identify areas that potentially your organization is overspending on, and be able to strategically make a decision earlier in the year versus later in the year when it gets caught. I think those timing differences are the world of difference to nonprofits at this point.
Yeah. Also, when you think about it, is also understanding what the metrics are that are going to help drive results of your organization.
Absolutely.
Again, whether it's a for-profit and you're looking at inventory turns and things like that, or it's a nonprofit organization where you're looking at level of service or type of service, or if you're a healthcare organization, who are my funding sources? What level of denials do I have? What am I doing to turn around those denials so that I put a good corrective action plan in place? So all of those things are things that then can get focused on more timely and strategically.
Right.
What are some of the red flags that signal an organization's back-end operations maybe aren't functioning the way they should be, and maybe they should start exploring whether there are other options for them?
I think one area that we always kind of see is the AP process. So, or I shouldn't say only the AP process. I should say there are multiple kind of areas of potential red flag, but I'll just take an example of the AP process for now. Is maybe it's taking a little bit longer for my AP to actually process and get things in, to be able to actually close out a month. We one thing that we always take a look at when we step into a project is say, how long is it taking for you to close out a month? How long is it taking you to do either a soft close or a hard close on the books? How long is it taking for that information and after that soft close for information to get up to the board? I think one huge red flag that you look at when you walk into sometimes when we walk into an organization is how often is the board getting information and how timely is that information. Sometimes what's being presented, let's see, we're in September now, sometimes what's being presented now is June numbers. It's like, so I'm 2.5 months now, or now we're 3 months into the year, into, let's say, a fiscal year. July, August, and September have already passed, and I'm presenting, let's say, June or July's numbers. That's 2 months behind. What else has gone on in that kind of 2 month aspect of things? What has gone on that I'm behind the eight ball? Because June numbers may not tell my picture of where I'm at now as an organization. So I think timing of when information's getting to the bodies that need to make decisions, I think that's the number one indicator that potentially you need to work with an outsourced solution.
Yeah, I agree. And a couple of people have made comments about the fact that, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Al, is that when you kind of look at outsourcing, one of the key elements is the fact that if someone were to leave, the organization is not up Schitt's Creek without a paddle.
Pretty much, pretty much. And I think working with the right, I guess one thing, I'm big about team, right? So I think the one thing when you're working is you get a team of individuals with different personalities, different aspects of things, and it's always, when we sit down at a table and we look at a client project or anything like that, it's how could we do things better for the client? And I think that's the one thing with picking the right outsource partner of things. It's that team mentality. We're not just looking to fill the void. We're looking at being a business partner with you guys and any client that we work with, and having kind of that organic relationship build over time.
One of the things that we haven't talked about or you haven't brought up is, there are a lot of organizations out there that are still relatively small, over $1 million, less than 5 million, who, are required to undergo an audit, but maybe they just don't have the back office functionality to do it, or the staffing, because the staff still need to process payroll and do all of those other things. I mean, outsourcing can also include the outsourcing of projects too, right?
Absolutely. I think one thing that we've had multiple clients kind of come back to us and say, through projects that we've worked with, hey, how can you backfill kind of our audit kind of function of things? We haven't, maybe not this year, but maybe next year, because, like you said, maybe it's a small organization that's growing, that next year is the year that they're going to get hit with a audit. And not everyone has been through that process before. A lot of times, starter organizations, these are, let's say, practitioners or someone with a good mission that is the executive director that created this wonderful, beautiful nonprofit, but they're not an accountant by trade or have handled an audit or any aspect of that kind of piece. So that is certainly something that we assist many of our clients with, is organizing, assisting. Depending on the outsource level that we potentially already have access to all the documents necessary and everything that's needed in order to prepare for that review, close the books in a timely fashion, get that review done, and work with their work with their independent CPA firm in facilitating that, with very little to next of back office function that they need to actually do, that we handle that all, kind of autonomously ourselves, at the direction of the powers to be.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I know that there have been situations where you've had organizations or businesses that have gone through an audit, had a lot of adjusting journal entries, have had management letter comments, and they're really looking from a compliance perspective to ensure that on a go-forward basis, they're better able to handle it, especially if they have a cost report that has to be filed and maybe they're not maximizing their reimbursement, or they have a federal audit that they have to go through, and maybe they're getting compliance issues, which could end up having them lose their funding sources and things like that.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I think that's, a lot of that kind of compliance aspect in these different projects that potentially pop up, we're able to mostly handle and kind of absorb for our clients, which, I think not having to look for an additional resource that could potentially help, or for us to be able to, let's say it's some one-off that's outside of kind of the accounting industry, connecting you with the right people that work within kind of, I know we're talking a lot about nonprofit,
Well, this is
but
nonprofit and
yeah,
for-profit, so both are
right.
here.
So, connecting you guys with the right people that could potentially help.
So when an organization is looking for outside support, which is what we've been talking about, what qualities or practices should they prioritize in picking that outsourced partner?
I think I think whenever you're looking at potentially outsourcing, I think what's really important for an organization to look, is not just going to an outsourced partner and saying, I want to outsource, right? Because that's very broad spectrum. As we were talking as we've been talking in this conversation, outsourcing can mean a whole lot of different things. It could be, are we looking for operational efficiencies? Are we looking for better board reporting? Are we looking for, assessing our accounting system and determining if it's still the right solution for us, or we need to pivot to something else and implement a new accounting? I think what's important is step one is almost self-reflecting as an organization, and kind of the different leaders of each department, and saying, hey, this potentially is the way that we might want to help our back office a little bit. What is those top 5 type of items that we could see that we could do better? And then be able to come with that list to the conversation of an outsourced partner, whether it's someone that's coming to us or going to another outsourced solution out there, is have those top 5 or 6 things that you could say, hey, organizationally, we could potentially do better on this. And at least it gives the outsourced partner an area of focus. Because
I think sometimes it comes down to kind of layering what you're looking for. So these are the needs that I have. So I
right.
definitely need these items. I need some of the book, the debits and the credits, or whatever it happens to be.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the add-ons that I want on top of that, and then start to really understand what the value of each of them is and what the cost of each of them is, so you can make a real assessment, cost value, as to which direction you're going to move in.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's really important.
So, so how does then outsourcing support the long-term sustainability of helping organizations to adapt to change, whether it's leadership transition or new regulations or mergers and acquisitions or growth or whatever it would happen to be? How does outsourcing kind of support all of those pieces?
So let's talk about, kind of organizational transition. Let's say a CFO is stepping down out of their position, they're retiring. Organization hasn't necessarily internally have that individual that's going to potentially step up. So the way that we could help is we could take a look at a lot of that function of what's going on, potentially step in as an interim with the team aspect of things, to help direct, so that way the wheels don't fall off, and continue that organization strategically moving forward, and potentially finding the next, kind of the next of king candidate that's going to take over the organization, and be able to not only be able to look at it, and give fresh perspective of things, of like, hey, yeah, this candidate's going to be great because they're going to fit in with all, kind of everything that you guys are doing here. Um, there's a lot of there's a lot of pieces of the organization here of what we could also look at. One thing that we also look at is we don't only focus on our job now of what the tasks have to be. We also want to forecast 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, kind of almost like a 5 year plan here of what's the direction that the organization's looking at moving in. Like here we are today financially. One thing that I think we also do a really good job at is what other potential funding sources are out there that maybe you guys haven't even thought about even reaching out for, and making sure that the financial picture and reporting really looks tight and looks good, that you could go and actually go out and apply for this grant that you never thought that you would be able to apply for, and open up new avenues of funding. I think being able to look at all these different aspects of an organization and be able to direct and help the leadership team not only have to make their own internal decisions, but also us with the industry knowledge that we have, pushing them in the right direction to say, this is where you should go. I mean, the other thing is for-profit industry, is the owner looking at, are they income driven at this point, or are they looking for potentially a merger or an acquisition, because they're looking at retiring soon? So it's aligning them and having those strategic conversations with the ownership team of saying, all right, well, if you're looking at selling, this is where you really need to look at and focus on your EBITDA, or you may need to kind of cut costs and become more efficient here for this to look better for a potential buyer, to look into. So I think these are kind of all the strategic things that, from our experience, we could really help organizations.
One of the things that you mentioned during that is you talked about having the experience. So I think part of the answer here, correct me if I'm wrong, is to make sure that if you are going to an outsource option, that outsource option really understands your business and understands the industry that you're in, so that they can really be a resource and kind of point out ways that you can create efficiencies.
Right. I think, I'm seeing a question actually pop up here kind of about outsourcing international kind of
I was going
connections
to
and
throw that
things
out
that
next when you finish
that
with this.
that actually caught my eye. So sorry, I was distracted by the question that was coming up, because I do have an answer for that one as well. So again, I think a lot of this is just making sure that organizations are kind of aligning themselves with kind of the right partners here, to make sure that they're really working with, because you could walk into outsourcing just like anything else, or just like any software that's out there for accounting, and it looks like a great package, it's going to save us so much time on things, and you try to shove it down everyone's throat that's within the organization to say, hey, this is going to be great, and it's just not a fit. It's because it's too robust, too complicated of a package or anything like that. And I think that's the most important, is making sure that you're using the right tools that are necessary for your organization.
Okay, so since you were salivating about the outsource question, and
Yeah.
we're running out of time, so if you can answer the outsource question, then I'll answer the last question, and we'll move on.
Sounds good. So talking about kind of, I think the big thing is kind of overseas, and there are certain things that you could certainly outsource to kind of overseas internationally potentially, because again, no longer I think are we governed by, I shouldn't say governed, but no longer are we shackled by the geographical kind of constraints that we used to because of remote work and everything else. I think what's really important is the vetting process. If you are looking at going international, and really having those in-depth conversations of what compliance does that organization you potentially are aligning yourself with, and also what are you feeding them? Is it sensitive data? Is it not sensitive data that you're going to be feeding them? Yes, there is a time difference depending on how far overseas that you're getting, but maybe they're running this back office function or anything. I think you really have to look at your mix between technology and potentially outsourcing overseas, internationally, that needs to be weighed and measured.
I mean, I think as you were saying, I think you have to worry about HIPAA potential
Yep.
concerns and stuff like that. You also need to ensure from an insurance perspective that your insurance adequately covers the fact that if you are outsourcing on an international level, if there's something goes wrong, is that something that your insurance is going to take care of?
Right.
We're just about out of time, so I'm going to answer the last question and we'll close out here. Someone asked about outsourcing firm. How does that work with in terms of your annual audit work. If you're doing outsourcing, you can't also do the audit because an auditor cannot review the work that they're doing. That's a independence issue. And one of the key elements of an audit is that the auditor must be independent. So you can't have the same firm outsource and do the audit for you. We do have to close up. We are out of time. So thank you all for joining us today for this Cerini Connection. We hope that this session gave you a clear picture of how outsourcing can help optimize operations, create efficiencies, and support long-term sustainability. A special thank you to you, Al, for bringing your experience and expertise to this meeting today. So thank you very much. Before we wrap up, I'm excited to share that next month we'll be joined by Theo Masalin from NAM Media, who will be talking about emerging trends in marketing, including AI, digital storytelling, and social media. You won't want to miss that. If you'd like to continue the conversation or have specific questions about your organization's needs, please don't hesitate to reach out to Al. And of course, keep an eye out for the upcoming Cerini Connection sessions. We'd love to have you back. If you guys have ideas for topics, please let us know. And thank you and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.